I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, some legal maneuvers and new accusers in the sexual harassment case against San Diego Mayor Bob Filner. Also tonight, President Barack Obama pays a visit to Camp Pendleton, a thank you to military families.
I'm Peggy Pico. Naval researchers in San Diego report deployment and combat are not the reasons for the rising number of military suicides. The real causes and what can be done about it coming up. Then, our in-depth conversation on the benefits, risk, and ethical debate of drones.
From the civil rights movement to Congress to comic books, the long journey of Congressman John Lewis. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Some new developments tonight in the sexual harassment case against San Diego Mayor Bob Filner, including new accusations and legal maneuvers. But first, a letter from former Mayor Jerry Sanders. Writing in his capacity as CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, Sanders has uninvited Filner from a delegation trip to Washington, D.C. this fall because of the current controversies. Sanders says the chamber cannot risk any major distraction impeding the region's business. Also today, Filner's attorney has asked for a change of venue in the sexual harassment lawsuit filed by his former communications director. He wants to move the case to Imperial County because of media coverage in San Diego. The request comes with a psychologist's note saying Filner will not be available for a scheduled deposition on Friday. The note says Filner is in an intensive treatment program. The psychologist's name is blacked out. Attorney Gloria Allred represents Irene McCormick Jackson, the former staffer suing Filner. She's agreed to move the deposition to next month, but says the case should be tried in San Diego, where Filner is mayor and where she says the harassment took place. A hearing on that change of venue is set for September 16th. A group of women veterans has gone from planning to honor Filner to calling for his resignation.
He needs to hear how he's impacted this population. But he's made us more so ever determined to make sure that we rid this from our society. There is no way that we could just shun and sweep this away. This is who we are.
Now, the group supports military victims of rape and sexual assault. KPBS Metro reporter Sandia Dirks talked with one of those women today and joins us from the News Center with the story. So who did you speak with today, Sandia?
I talked to Eldana Fernandez. She's a retired master sergeant and a motivational speaker, and she's part of a group called the National Women Veterans Association of America. And they support military women who have been raped and sexually assaulted while in service. Fernandez gave a speech at one of their events where she talked about the 3 rapes that she had endured. And Filner asked for her card, and then he asked her on a date.
I mean, it's not big news, a man hitting on a woman. That happens all the time, you know, and I thought he was a little direct with it, and it seemed a little bit strange. I didn't really think anything of it. But then when the news started to come out that he was just kind of basically doing this, and I read one of the other women's statements about what he said, and it was basically the same thing he said to me. Are you married? I think you're beautiful. I want to take you to dinner. It's almost like push, rewind, and play.
Hernandez says what troubles her is that he seemed to target women who were already vulnerable. She says that there were around 10 separate women, all who were victims of rape and sexual assault while in the military, who were hit on by the mayor at similar events. And she says what makes this behavior so predatory, in her opinion, is these were events to promote healing from very traumatic assaults. So Fernandez says it was just not appropriate to hit on any one of them.
What does Fernandez want from the mayor?
Well, like every single woman who's come forward, she wants him to resign. And as you just mentioned, so does the National Veterans Association of America. You saw their shirts reading, "Please resign." They say they take the matter seriously, and there is nothing funny about touching and triggering memories in rape survivors. Meanwhile, no comment from the mayor's office.
KPBS Metro reporter Sandia Dirks. You can find all of our coverage of this ongoing story online at kpbs.org/news/Filner. President Obama visited Camp Pendleton today for the first time as Commander-in-Chief. KPBS videographer Katie Ufrat has the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinguished honor and privilege to introduce to you the 44th President of the United States and your Commander-in-Chief, President Barack Obama.
The president told the crowd of nearly 3,000 that the war in Afghanistan has entered its final chapter, and he thanked the Marines for their service there and on the battlefields of Iraq.
And when future generations study those fights, they will stand in awe of the unparalleled sacrifice of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, our Dark Horse Marines.
But Obama also warned that the end of the war does not mean the end of danger. He also pledged to keep the military strong despite federal budget cuts.
Here at Pendleton, you're feeling it. Hard-working folks are getting furloughed. Families getting by on less. Fewer ships available for your training exercises. The commissary your families rely on closed a day a week. We can do better than that. That's not how a great nation should be treating its military and military families. So that's why I'm going to keep on working to get rid of this sequester. You get up and do your jobs every day. Let's make sure Washington gets up and does its job.
The president also pledged to keep up efforts to find jobs for veterans and to help wounded warriors.
After all you've given to our nation, you have to know your nation will always be faithful to you. As your Commander-in-Chief, that's my commitment to you.
Today's visit also included a meeting with families of fallen troops.
And God bless the United States of America.
And Obama spent about 10 minutes shaking hands with the troops before heading home. Katie Ufrat, KPBS News.
A new study we told you about last night finds military suicides are increasing, but it's not linked to combat. Peggy Pico has more on the story.
The largest report of its kind by naval health researchers in San Diego found suicide patterns in current and former military personnel now parallel those found in civilians. But surprisingly, the increase in service member suicide is not linked to combat. Here with more details from the San Diego Naval Health Research Center are epidemiologist Cynthia Leardman and lead investigator of the study, Nancy Crum-Cianfloni. Welcome.
Thank you.
Cynthia, this study is part of a much larger military personnel survey called the Millennium Cohort Study. How many service members are in that study? And among the findings of your research, how many committed suicide?
Right. So currently in the Millennium Cohort Study, there's over 200,000 current and former service members. For this particular study on suicide, we examined over 150,000 personnel, and there were 83 suicides among those people.
So it seems like a small amount, but you have a big population you're looking at.
That's right. I mean, suicide in the military is still a very rare event.
Okay. And Nancy, the Department of Defense reported more than 80% of military suicides in recent years were among personnel who had never been deployed, never been in combat. So if it's not about going to combat fields and the stressors there, what is linked to this increased risk of suicide?
Well, this study found that what's linked to suicides are mental health issues like depression, manic depressive disorder, alcohol misuse. In addition, we found that men have a higher risk of suicide than women. And actually, these are the same risk factors that we would expect to see in the civilian population as well. So it suggests that they're parallel.
In this study, how were you able to determine that there weren't deployment-related factors?
We specifically looked at the DoD records of who deployed in support of the recent operations, how many days they spent in theater, if they experienced combat. We also looked at their occupations, and we found no associations with any of those military-related factors and then subsequent suicides.
It seems counterintuitive, so I guess I'll go with you, Nancy, on this one again. But it seems like combat could lead to mental stressors that could then lead to suicidal tendencies. Is that link followed that far back?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you could make a link that combat might lead to mental health issues that would lead to suicide, but remember that mental health issues can arise independent of combat, independent of deployments. And so what I think we're seeing here is that mental health issues, independent of whether you deployed or not, are the main drivers for suicide risk. So that we should be focused not so much on deployment, but more focused on who has a mental health issue, who has an alcohol-related problem, and focus on that for preventative strategies.
Well, let's go with that. So, Cynthia, if the risk factors, let's say, are the same about for civilians and military, why does it seem like the numbers of suicide in the military population are going up as higher than the civilian?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting point. I think historically, the suicide rates in the military population have been quite a lot lower than the civilian rates. And so as time has progressed, we've seen the civilian rate, the military rates start increasing. Probably around 2005, we saw a kind of a sharp increase. And so now they're actually quite similar to the civilian rates. I mean, now they're ranging around 18 per 100,000 per year. And so I think they're similar, but I think the reason to study this is because that they have been increasing from this historical low that they've been at.
Right, and comparatively, if this civilian rate is meaning pretty much steady and this is going up, that discrepancy, any ideas of what that?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing, not our study, but other studies have shown that there's an increase in mental health disorders among military personnel and veterans. And so if there's an increase in mental health symptoms and these problems, that would be linked with this increased suicide risk.
And Nancy, do you think there's some suicide prevention programs in the military that could use this information to their benefit to improve themselves?
Absolutely. And I think what this study really helps us do is to focus in on what are the main issues that we should be looking at. And clearly that's mental health issues and alcohol-related problems. And so if we could, I think it's an encouragement to the military to develop programs to prevent these issues, strengthen programs they already have, and then to assure military service members who are suffering from depression or alcohol-related problems have access to care and have very effective care for these conditions.
All right, I want to let folks know that on our website we have links to this report and also where you can get help if you are in the military and feeling like you might be at risk of suicide or a family member is. But I want to thank you both so much for the update on this study.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It may seem like Sandag approved its big transportation plan months ago, but it's already beginning work on a new one. The planning agency is starting with some changes to address complaints, calling the last one too highway happy. Our Speak City Heights reporter Megan Burks is in the News Center with more. Megan, what happened with the last plan?
The state sued Sandag for the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan because it failed to reduce car pollution fast enough. But local opponents said the real problem was that the plan favored suburbanites over the people who use buses and trolleys in the city's urban core. It front-loaded freeways and focused new transit lines up north.
And how will the new plan be different?
Well, they're just getting started on their regional comprehensive plan, which will have a transportation component. Sandag is currently taking a look at how it will prioritize highway and transit projects in that plan. For the first time, it will add weight to projects that reduce social inequities and increase walking and biking.
Now, the community got a look at the new grading system this week. What was the reaction?
Well, it's in its early stages, but already City Heights residents say it could use some work. I spoke with Randy Van Vleck of the City Heights Community Development Corporation, and he says it might actually encourage disinvestment in the neighborhood. Projects that get people out of cars and into buses and trolleys stand to score four times more in some categories than those where transit is already high, like in City Heights.
So can the community weigh in on this?
Yes, Sandag will be taking public comment until the board votes on its proposal in October. For details on how to submit a comment, find our story on the website kpbs.org.
Speak City Heights reporter Megan Burks. San Diego Gas and Electric wants new solar customers to add a piece of high-tech equipment to their systems. They're tablet-sized devices called smart inverters. They modulate power from solar systems, controlling the voltage. For example, they prevent fluctuations when clouds roll by.
Right now, if you have a system disturbance, they could be turned off and not turned back on. We'd like to have the remote capability to turn them back on so that they contribute back into the grid as soon as possible. Also, we can control through a remote signal the voltage levels so that they integrate very smoothly with the grid.
State utility regulators are considering the impact of smart inverters and other smart grid technologies as more solar generating capacity comes online. A pair of suspected U.S. drone strikes killed 4 al-Qaeda militants in Yemen on Tuesday. Peggy Pico explores the benefits, risks, and ethics of unmanned aerial vehicles.
Unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, commonly called drones, are used in areas from warfare and border enforcement to tracking wildfires and crop dusting. Their rising popularity comes with concerns over privacy and accountability. Here with diverse perspectives on the dilemma of drone use are Larry Hinman, professor of philosophy at USD, and Lucian Miller, CEO of Innovative Designs in San Diego. Welcome.
A pleasure to be here.
Larry, one of the main ethical concerns around military drone use is the incidence of civilian casualties. How accurate are drones at hitting their targets?
You know, intuitively, you'd think that they were very accurate, but the most recent studies indicate that still manned aircraft are more accurate than their drone counterparts. There was an article just in the Department of Defense journal PRISM just a few months ago about that.
So the concerns over civilian casualties are
they
legitimate.
Still remain, yeah.
Okay. And Lucian, your company makes drones and UAVs. You've brought them here. They're one and the same. Tell us about what you've brought today.
Well, we've brought 3 examples of some of the models that we produce. This is actually a prototype of a new system that we're developing that could be used by SWAT teams or something, police departments, if they needed to get a inside view of a room. You could throw a brick through a window, fly this craft in there, and then with a small little video receiver, you could pan around the room, see what's going on, and then get right back out to find out, like if you had a hostage situation or if you needed to find out what kind of guns people had in a room or something, you could do that.
And what about that big one to the right of you there? What's
this
that?
one over here, this is our Navigator 800mm hex craft. And this one's primarily used for people that are doing photography, like wedding photography, real estate photography, or action sports photography. People will take these out to places like Glamis when they're running their dirt bikes up and down the sand dunes to get that really cool eye-in-the-sky perspective that you can't get any other way.
You have a story about how a drone was used recently in Canada that was non-military.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Back on May 6th of this year in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, there was a reported case of a gentleman who had run his car off the road and flipped the car and was ejected from the vehicle. Didn't have a coat on, and when he was thrown out, he pulled his shoes off. And all he had in his pocket was a cell phone. Well, he called the Canadian equivalent of 911, reported the situation. But because he was out so far, it took a while for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to get there. When they arrived, they found his car, but the guy was nowhere to be found. Well, it just so happened that this group had one of the new Dragonfly X4 quadcopters, very similar in size to the one we have down here, on the floor in front of us, that was equipped with an infrared camera system that could see heat signatures. So they put that thing up, searched around, and within minutes, they found a bright white dot at the base of a snowbank about 600 feet away from the car. They sent the Mounties over. They found the guy. He was already suffering from late stages of hypothermia. He was curled up in a ball, unresponsive.
The drone, or the UAV.
The UAV was able to find him, and they rushed him to the hospital, and he made a full recovery. Had they not had that there, he could have died, from freezing to death overnight.
Well, Larry, clearly it can be used for good, but there are concerns over accountability. Tell us about those.
Well, part of the issue, I think what we face as a challenge is how to move forward in a way that will get the good uses and let the harmful uses drop off to the side. In the military context, that's harder. In the civilian context, I think you've got some tremendous possibilities of very cost-effective uses of unmanned aerial vehicles that would be really exciting.
And then that brings up, Lucian, the question of privacy. What do you want to say to people and critics that say, look, this is an invasion of privacy? If the police are flying this over my backyard, it's against our constitutional rights to privacy. What do you say to people who have that argument?
There's already laws on the books for, anti-voyeurism, anti-peeping Tom, for privacy and things like that. There are police helicopters every day flying over people's houses that could look at your yard and find something in your yard. This technology it's not used in a persistent manner. It's used on an as-needed basis. The typical flight times of these aircraft with the batteries that they come with is only 10 to 15 minutes. So it's not like a policeman's going to be driving down the road and looking in the window of every house down the street. It's made so that when you come to a situation where you need an eye-in-the-sky view to get a tactical advantage of a situation, you can deploy the small UAV, get it up in the air, see what you need to do in 5 or 6 minutes, and then land it. That's what the purpose of this stuff is. So you're not going to see, policemen driving down the road all night, peeping in your bedroom window and wondering what you're doing.
All right. Well, there's so much more to discuss about this. Certainly on our website, people can find that conversation, kpbs.org. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, look at here. No blackout for the San Diego Chargers. They sold enough tickets for tomorrow night's preseason opener against the Seattle Seahawks. Game time, 7 o'clock. It might be a little overcast for that game. We're looking for temperatures in the 70s along the coast. Same for the inland valleys with some clouds. Sunny 70s in the mountains. Desert temperatures well above 100. John Lewis began life as the son of sharecroppers on a farm in rural Alabama. He went on to speak alongside Martin Luther King Jr. at the March on Washington, eventually becoming a U.S. Congressman. His incredible life story is now a graphic autobiography entitled March. KPBS Metro reporter Sandia Dirks visited with Lewis when he came to San Diego for Comic-Con.
Among all the superheroes wandering the floor of the convention center at this year's Comic-Con was a less conspicuous hero, civil rights champion John Lewis. Hundreds lined up to have him sign copies of his new autobiography, March. So how did a congressman become a comic book author? It began with a young man who was working on the congressman's 2008 re-election campaign. That staffer's name? Andrew Aden.
It was towards the end of the campaign. As things were winding down, folks started to talk about what they were going to do after, and unashamed, I said I would be going to a comic book convention. And there was a little teasing, but Congressman Lewis stood up for me.
And I tried to do what I could to put it down and said, you shouldn't laugh. At another time, in another period, there was a comic book called The Montgomery Story, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery Story, that inspired me.
That comic book is 15 thin pages of colored newsprint that tells the story of the Montgomery protest sparked by Rosa Parks' 1955 refusal to give up her seat on a public bus. But it also serves as something else, a primer on the nonviolent method. It was a lesson that John Lewis put to use as he and fellow students planned sit-ins at segregated lunch counters in the early 1960s.
Congressman John Lewis is an American icon.
His staffer, self-professed fanboy Andrew Aden, quickly became convinced Lewis should tell his own story as a comic.
I thought he was somewhat out of his mind. Why would I be writing a comic book? And he didn't give up. He didn't give in. He was persistent. And he came back and said, Congressman, let's write a comic book. And I do remember reading the Montgomery Story comic book, and I said, yes, if you would do it with me. And it's been a labor of love.
This is the first of 3 books that will span the congressman's 70 decades, and it begins with stories of a young John Lewis tending chickens on his family farm, trying out sermons on the birds.
And he was a man who is best rendered in 4 lines or 5 lines if you can do it.
Graphic artist Nate Powell says it is these very human beginnings that give him and the reader the audacity to see from Lewis's perspective.
There were certain moments, free of context, where I felt like I could simply slip into his shoes for that moment. And I knew precisely what it was like to witness, the baptism of these chickens, the loss of a beloved hen down a well, the hiding under the porch so that he could sneak away from his house in order to get an education each day and hop on the bus with his mom chasing after him.
That intimacy is evident in the shadowed, up-close visual perspectives that mark the early parts of the book. But Powell says there were moments where drawing the narrative gave him pause.
I will hit a certain milestone within the narrative, whether it's depicting, trying to find the appropriate and powerful way to respectfully depict the murder of Emmett Till.
The book, its creators say, isn't just history. Like the comic book that inspired it, March is meant to be a primer for a new generation on the power of nonviolent protest. That is something co-author Andrew Aden says was never far from his mind.
This may get me in trouble, but I really believe that the generation between the Congressman and Nate and I has in some sense failed us. I think they sold out a little bit. And I think we, our generation, needs to pick up a torch again.
Too many people, even today, the 21st century, have been left out and left behind. They're black, they're white, they're Latino, they're Asian American, they're Native American. And the book is trying to say that we all must continue to be restless.
Lewis says that in the age of Trayvon Martin and the recent Supreme Court decision on voting rights, young people need to find a way to connect to the greater struggle for civil rights.
I remember hearing Martin Luther King Jr. preach from time to time, and his father would be in the pulpit, and he would say, "Son, make it plain, make it plain." So between Nate and Andrew, they made it plain.
As plain as a picture. Sandhya Dirks, KPBS News.
March hits bookstores on August 13th. Tonight's stories are online at kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Good night.